I'm Joel Bell, the chairman of the Schumer Foundation for Ethics and Leadership. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome you all here to the beginning of the Congress of Vienna 2015. I stand here and say that, but I do so on behalf of many, many people who have made a great deal of effort in support of this initiative. I could go on, and they're all mentioned in your booklet, and I won't take a lot of time, but permit me just to say that it would not have taken place, this event could not have happened without a significant role that so many people have played. People like Oliver Rathkolb, who's chairman of our International Advisory Committee, Clemens Helsberg of the Vienna Philharmonic, Wolfgang Petrich, Ferdinand Trautmannsdorf, Minister Josef Ostermeier, who is the first person to whom I ever mentioned the idea of this Congress, and who took up the cause and has been very instrumental in the support that we got from government. And I said, thank you very much for that, Minister. Hans Winkler at the Diplomatic Academy, with whom we've held one of the preliminary pre-Congress events, a youth Congress, that will continue with 110 or 120 students at the Diplomatic Academy concurrently with our discussions over the next few days, all organized with Hans at the Diplomatic Academy. And thank you for that, Hans. Wolfgang and Catherine Olitsky, who's been a great help here. Tassilo Metternich, who didn't realize it at the time, but planted the seed that about 9 months later germinated into the idea of the Congress of Vienna. Andreas Maret-Pokorny, whom I'll introduce in a short while. Isabella Ponta and Werner Eben, who've been dear friends and supporters of the organizing of this event. Tom Kane and Vartan Gregorian, who've come from New York. Manfred Matzka, who really has been my can-do partner. You will see lots of evidence that some of which you will not notice, others of which you will, that have only been possible because of Manfred's kind help and effectiveness. The authors of the background papers are listed and very important to the preparation work we did. And of course, you, the delegates and participants, it now does turn on the input we hope to have from you. In your books, you'll also see a list of research and support people who have made the organization of this really work. So why are we here? Well, we proposed that it was an important time to call a group together, a diverse group of people from different places around the world, truly global, representative of the different views that affect the world order, people who are serious and engaged in those questions, free to think thoughts, largely by virtue of not currently holding government office, and to have a discussion about how the world order might be improved to increase the chances of stability, fairness, and do so in a durable way. I guess the proposition is that if a group like this cannot agree on what needs to happen, then who can? If we can, then the challenge is to take the message forward to our political leaders and see if we can't get commitment in policy to implement some of those ideas. We are in a world, and it's always been thus, of competing national interests, of conflicts, and despite the absence of major war, conflicts that are unfortunately getting worse. And so it seemed appropriate now to be talking about this. To be in this business, to do the kinds of things we do, you have to be an optimist. So I guess we are, but also in our foundation, very much of the belief that this is too important not to try. We have gathered you here. We're not in search, I should say, of a new institution. We're in search of relationships and dialogue, new ideas for how people can get along. Frankly, it's my conviction that the best of institutions fail in the absence of the desire and political will to collaborate and find solutions, and the poorest of institutions work just fine when that resolve is there. And that is our conviction, that is our perspective that we bring to this dialogue. We chose Vienna, building on the inspiration of the great statesmen that gathered here 200 years ago in the very room we will start our meetings in tomorrow. But we're not in the world of Metternich and Talleyrand and Castlereagh. We're not even in the world of Churchill and Roosevelt and Stalin, nor in the Bush-Gorbachev-Kohl world. They, in large part, in the early parts of this at least, in the Congress of Vienna, we're looking at Europe, largely Europe. We have a global perspective in the world that we're living in, a much more heterogeneous and challenging environment in which to have those discussions. They were dealing in the post-war when there was a broad conviction of the priority of achieving stability, and where the winners get to write the rules. We're dealing in a situation in which there are competing powers, in which the conviction of the overall priority of stability as an end in itself is not as prominent. The men who met here 200 years ago spent months here. They worked by day, they mixed socially by night. They got to know one another. There's some new research out that suggested it wasn't that they needed that time to agree. They needed that time, according to Brian Vick, who's written a book this past year on the subject, to understand public opinion and to influence public opinion, to accept the vision they had for the solution. Today, our leaders have limited time to spend together. Such time as they do is often pre-planned, and the communiques are indeed written before the meeting starts. Often the purpose of the meeting is for political leaders to appeal to their constituencies back home. The polarization, the politicization of some of these issues back home has also meant that it's a world in which they're being attacked for ideas they float before they've had time to refine, to talk about them, to flesh them out. In a lack of trust that we've seen grow for sometimes not appropriate reasons, sometimes justified reasons, but lack of trust in governments and leaders, we don't give a lot of slack to our political leaders to have those kinds of conversations. We communicate nuanced and difficult issues in sound bites. Frankly, media transparency under those circumstances makes it very hard to explore bold solutions. And past leaders, particularly those acting in the aftermath of war, had an easier environment in which to configure a new world than we have today. Nonetheless, the challenge is as real and necessary as ever. Henry Kissinger, in his recent book, called for what he called, and I quote, an effective mechanism for the major powers to consult and possibly cooperate on the most consequential issues, end of quote. Bottom line, we must create a politically safe way for our leaders to explore solutions and the problems that confront us. One comment on the issue of what we do with conclusions that we might find, ideas we might have on a process that we could agree going forward if we can't yet reach agreement on content and terms, is whether the groups like ours are as influential as they might once have been. In worlds of concentrated power and center in governments, gridlocks in places like the United States, it's less likely that the broader community gets a chance to influence some of those decisions. And so one of the questions we have to ask is if we are able to come to some views, what is the way in which we have to explore influencing or making room for our political leaders to have those exploratory talks in a safe and effective way so that some new judgments can be made on the world order. We will not cover much of that ground or get results on that in the course of a three-day event, but let's hope we can make a start, establish a process that is promising going forward, and who knows, maybe we'll be able to look back in some years and say something new got started here in Vienna in 2015. I thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure now to introduce to you some of the people who will come to the podium and who've been so helpful to us in this process of organizing our Congress. My first name is that of Andy Madat-Picorni, who has served Vienna as Executive Counselor of Culture and Science. I hear him called in this town Mr. Culture, but I know he's also overseen the growth of a very innovative environment on the scientific side in this country, or in this city. I saw Andy in action in a program we organized in New York a year and a half ago, and I can tell you he's a wonderful ambassador for Vienna and for Austria. In fact, I said to him then that I thought we could get him elected in New York, but the electors of this city have beat us to it, and he and his government have been re-elected, as you all know, only a couple of weeks ago. When I raised this idea of a Congress with Andy, he had nothing but encouragement and support. You'll see that he has done that in tangible ways as well. He's listed his responsible department is listed in the book as one of the sponsors. And Andy, thank you very much, and please come and address us.